The dominance and prowess the BYU football program is putting on display right now was foretold many, many moons ago.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, executive producer of the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah, and a 14-year credentialed media member at BYU. I am your resident expert and insider, your host here on this podcast. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about something I had a conversation with multiple people with going back more than a decade, and it explains why BYU is as good as they are right now. We'll get into that. Then we're going to talk about how the Cougars avoid the post-rivalry letdown that they had happen a season ago that ultimately cost them their opportunity to play for a Big 12 title. Then we'll finish up today's show doing something we typically do on Mondays, but we've been tied up this week, our Big 12 stock report. So we'll get to all that, and it's all brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege and get $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. And many of you know, and if you don't, my background in sports media goes back essentially to the start of BYU's independent run. I was an intern with Greg Wrubell in 2010, 2011. So essentially the final stanza of BYU's run in the Mountain West Conference, I was an intern for. After that, BYU went independent in football. They entered the West Coast Conference in basketball, and that's the way things stood for 12 plus years. Then came the Big 12 invite that the Cougars had chased all those years, and they're obviously doing what they're doing right now, having won 18 of their last 20 in football, and obviously having the likes of a Kevin Young prowling the sidelines for BYU basketball, having AJ DeBonsa. Everything's looking very, very good for BYU sports. The reason I bring all this up is I am hearkening more and more back to conversations I had with at least three individuals. I'm not going to reveal their identities, but I know at least two of them are fairly regular listeners of this podcast. Maybe not everydayers, as all of you, I hope, are. But we had conversations throughout that run during BYU's independent era, and watching Utah be as dominant as they were against BYU, they reiterated to me time and time and time again saying, Jake, if BYU can get to that level, and they were pointing at Utah essentially and saying if they can become a Power 5, now a Power 4 program, BYU will make up the ground that they seem to have lacked and have yielded to Utah in record time. Well, I think that the evidence of that is right before us right now. Remember, BYU entered the Big 12 in 2023. They struggled through a 5-7 campaign in football, had a fairly good run in basketball with the first-round exit in the NCAA tournament that surprised a lot of folks. But then from then on, BYU's been gangbusters in their two most important sports, speaking of football and men's basketball. As I mentioned, Kevin Young comes in and leads BYU basketball to a Sweet 16 berth in his first season. Well, they've upped the stakes this year with the number one overall recruit in the recruiting class, speaking of AJ DeBonsa, potentially the number one pick in next year's NBA draft. So things are looking good for basketball. Kalani Sitake, as I mentioned, has won 18 of his last 20 games that he's coached over the past season and a half. BYU football could not be riding a bigger high, it feels like right now. Had they maybe played for a Big 12 title, that may have made the difference last year. But the point I'm trying to make here is, yes, there's been some good fortune that has come BYU's way by way of the transfer portal and also NIL. The fact that BYU's boosters, and they're a large and very deep-pocketed bunch is probably the best term I can use, and they are bringing that to bear. But as I said, the three individuals I vividly remember having multiple conversations with about BYU's chances, and I essentially brought up the topic, could BYU compete at the level that Utah was competing at the Power 5 level? And their response was, give us the opportunity, get BYU in that door, and watch us fly. Well, their words have proven to be prophetic because less than 3 seasons into their Big 12 tenure, BYU looks like a formidable force in the Big 12 and is looking poised to be that for years to come. And that's exactly what Cougar fans want. I know all of you out there want nothing more than to watch BYU win and win at the highest level and levels possible. Well, all of that is open to BYU. The 12-team playoff has made a national championship a realistic possibility for BYU football once again, after literally decades of that door being slammed in their face. Basketball, with AJ DeBonsa in tow, what are the prospects there? Well, they're ranked number 8 in the entire country entering this upcoming basketball season. It sure looks like BYU is doing exactly what Cougar fans dreamed of, hoped for, yearned for, thought maybe if they had the opportunity that they could maybe one day accomplish. And they've done it in what I would consider to be almost record time, less than 3 years on into their Big 12 tenure. It's absolutely phenomenal to watch BYU soaring and doing what it's doing. And I'm excited to see where the next things come that benefit BYU. I don't know what they're going to be, because it feels like college sports is changing all of the time. It seems like it's always in flux. And there's obviously conversations about the NCAA, the SCORE Act out there that they want to change the nation's laws with regards to NIL. We have guys like Cody Campbell at Texas Tech who want to collectively bargain the Power Four's media rights deals. There are so many things out there that are percolating. But the nice part is BYU appears well positioned to absorb whatever comes next. And secondly, they are ready to go with whatever comes next and thrive in that environment. The adaptability of the BYU athletic department, obviously helmed by Tom Holmoe, getting him into the Big 12 and shepherding him through the early stanzas here. And now Brian Santiago kind of picking up that baton and carrying forward. It looks like BYU is here to stay and could be one of, if not the dominant force in the Big 12, if they keep going kind of on that ascendant path that they're on right now. It's an exciting time to be a Cougar fan. I fully endorse that. The nice part is it doesn't look like it has an end date in sight. Could things change that could end that? Absolutely. We have seen that happen before in college sports, but BYU has got a lot of prowess, a lot of power, and they look like they're ready to make it just a hallmark of who they are in the Power 4 ranks, in the Big 12, and on the nation's stage. Like, they want to be a national player, and that will take some good fortune in its own right. But I'm not going to count BYU out of anything right now, because all they've done is prove those 3 individuals who I talked about right. And their words, once again, they're absolutely prophetic, Nostradamus type stuff. And BYU's proven them right time and time again. And hopefully the good times keep rolling for the foreseeable future. All right, coming up next, what does BYU football need to do to avoid the post-rivalry letdown that ultimately cost them last season? I got a few ideas on that. We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. They deliver confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick awards than anybody else as of August 2025. You can feel Japanese craftsmanship in every single detail, from metallic accents to available Napa leather upholstery. That sounds fancy. The best part is you can make everyday drives feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. And especially important here in Utah, with all-wheel drive standard in all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence through almost every season. Like our players, we sweat every single detail, because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. It's all courtesy of your friends over at Mazda, where they like to say, move and be moved. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Peloton. They are shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. It's their most advanced equipment yet, designed to give you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or cross-training with your favorite instructors. This is training reimagined. It's built for breakthrough, the tools that help you plan, stay motivated, and reach your peak performance along the way. The best part is the swivel screen is a game changer. You can go from running on the Tread Plus to strength training without missing a beat, and you don't have to be craning your neck to see if you can see what's actually going on. And the personalized class recommendations keep you engaged. You get workouts tailored to your vibe and energy level every single week. So let yourself run, lift, flex, and push forward. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus today at onepeloton.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, I got to give a special shout out to somebody who doesn't know I'm giving them a shout out today. So, Matt Detweiler has been a longtime listener of this podcast. Actually, just recently returned from his mission not that long ago. But he listened to my podcast before embarking on his mission service, and now he's a student at Brigham Young University. And he reached out to me earlier this week and said, "Hey, my professor has you on my screen in class," and sent me literally a screenshot of me on this professor's class. So I decided, you know what? I want to give this professor a shout out because they were talking about podcasts. He's doing a storytelling class down there at BYU, and they were talking about podcast formats and used me as an example. So Professor Richards, I appreciate you being an everydayer, as I understand it, watching the podcast, supporting my work, but apparently holding up as a standard to BYU students. I hope I set a good example for all of you out there, but thank you for the support. It's absolutely awesome to see stuff like that pop up from time to time. All right, let's talk BYU football, because remember last year, BYU came off a triumphal victory over the University of Utah, and then very quickly went down two straight losses in a row, losing to Kansas in pretty ignominious fashion, and then following that up with a game against Arizona State that had quite a bit of theatrics to it, and BYU almost coming back in said contest. But once again, an L in the column that ultimately cost them their dream a season ago after starting 9-0. They had dreams of going to the Big 12 title game, and they came oh so close. Strength of record and a few other metrics when it came to the tiebreakers cost BYU. They have talked, I'm telling you, time and time and time again throughout training camp. They talked about going from good to great. And Kalani, if you watch the cut this week, is using the term humble and hungry. BYU knows how close they were a season ago, and they know how much the post-rivalry aftermath cost them a year ago. So how do they go about combating that? Well, I think the number one thing they do is learn from their mistakes a season ago. They probably, coming off that win against Utah, were feeling really, really good about themselves. And sandwiched in between that matchup against Utah and then obviously a highly anticipated matchup at that point on the road at Arizona State, I would venture to say, I don't know this for certain, that some people took their eye off the task at hand and maybe overlooked Kansas ever so much, because Kansas at that point, sub 500, even though Kansas, speaking of the Jayhawks, was rolling when they came into Provo, Utah. You look at the record, you maybe have taken them just a little bit lightly, and had a quick kick from Jalen Daniels not glanced off the helmet of, I think it was Evan Johnson, if I recall. Things may have been different in that game. The simple fact of the matter is, I think BYU understands that you cannot lose sight of the goal and the task at hand. And that's why you hear all the time, it's a 1-week season. This BYU team was really, really good about that a season ago for essentially 11 of the 13 weeks they played. Those 2 weeks that they essentially took their eye off the goal or let it affect them, those are the post-rivalry lull that cost them, as I said, the ultimate goal of playing in Arlington and maybe going to the college football playoff. I believe that BYU's players, coaches, administrators, everybody involved with what happened a season ago have every intention on avoiding that very same scenario. Now, could they go to Iowa State and just get beat straight up? Absolutely. Matt Campbell has built an incredible pillar of consistency with the Cyclones. It is not an easy game, and our friends at FanDuel have installed BYU as a betting underdog in this game. No matter. BYU thrives as an underdog. We have seen that all year long. They continually seem to get overlooked, and I do think part of it is that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they don't bet. So betting markets have to, make up the ground to encourage, bets to come in on both sides. That's why you see lines maybe move as much as they did on the day of the game against Utah. The bigger point to be had here is BYU has learned lessons from a season ago, or they claim to have learned those lessons from a season ago. The proof will be in the pudding this week when they face off against Iowa State. The nice part is you don't have a game necessary to look beyond Iowa State too, because ISU is good enough that you shouldn't be looking past them. Yeah, have they absorbed some injuries? Absolutely. But they have had a bye week to heal up and get ready and study extra tape of BYU. And I'm sure they've got a few things, a few wrinkles that they will throw BYU's way in this game in Ames on Saturday. The other thing is BYU has a bye week after this. There's no looking all the way 3 weeks down the road to Texas Tech, because you shouldn't be looking that far down the road. You need to focus now and understand that right now,
That's what matters. Getting to 8-0 and pushing your ranking inside the top 10, because we're very quickly coming up on the season when the rankings actually matter, and that is the college football playoff rankings. They start coming out in the month of November. BYU needs to bolster their position as best they possibly can with a win this week in Ames, if at all possible, and find themselves inside the top 10, because a season ago, remember looking back at the CFP rankings, they mirrored a lot of what the AP poll was doing most of the year a season ago. So BYU knows that they cost themselves with having a slow, I guess, uptake last year with regards to the national media. Well, BYU's knocking on the door of the top 10. If you beat Iowa State this week, you're going to be inside the top 10, and that's exactly where you want to be entering the final stanza of your season. Yeah, the schedule is unrelenting because after Iowa State, you get a brief respite with the bye week, and then you go to Texas Tech, you're home to TCU, and then you go to Cincinnati. You'll only be halfway through after Saturday of the 6-game stretch that Aaron Roderick himself called the toughest stretch in BYU football history. But you have to get through it, and you have to fight tooth and nail. There's a lot of guys on this BYU team who are probably in desperate need of a bye week. You look at some of these guys, and we're seeing a lot of shoulder harnesses with regards to shoulder injuries that pop up throughout the season. There's a lot of those guys donning those. A lot of guys wearing horse collars. A lot of guys you're seeing wearing extra pads and whatnot to nurse along injuries. The thing about the Iowa State game is it's going to maybe be the toughest one of the season because you know that little break is right there. You're right on the precipice of getting that respite and the time you need to recover a little extra. But as Kalani Sitake has said multiple times before this, it is time to empty the tank. You have to go out there and give it everything within your power. Like I said, could BYU go in, literally give it all they've got and lose to Iowa State? Yeah, I absolutely couldn't see that happening because I really think Iowa State is a really, really solid program. And even with the injuries that they've absorbed, a guy like Matt Campbell, I don't put anything past him. He was speaking glowingly of Kalani Sitake and the BYU football program in his press conference this week, saying that if he had a son that could play college football, he would send him to play for a guy like Kalani Sitake. Those are great platitudes. Those are great things to say. Is he trying to butter BYU, make them feel good about themselves? Maybe. There may be a little gamesmanship there. But the bigger point is BYU knows how dearly the exultation over beating Utah and the rivalry win a season ago, how much it ultimately cost them, because there is a come down effect. You hype yourself up so much. There is so much stress. Parker Kingston said it himself this week in media availability. He said, you finish that game, all of a sudden you realize there is a ton of stress lifted off your shoulders. You can't have that equate to you being too relaxed. Then you walk into Ames, Iowa. The Cyclones come through like a hurricane, to use two different expressions, and mix them together. And all of a sudden, you're sitting and saying, what in the heck just happened? You don't want to limp into a bye week with your first loss of the year and suddenly find yourself plummeting down the rankings, much like Texas Tech did after their loss to Arizona State. Tech went from 7 to 14. If the logic holds, could BYU drop from 11 to like 20? Yeah, that very well could be the case. So the whole goal for BYU is focus on the here and now, put everything you've got into this game plan, give your heart, soul, mind, body, whatever it takes to go and get this victory, and find yourself sitting pretty at 8-0 going into a bye week, and then rest up and get ready for the stretch run, because that is when it really comes into focus of what your ultimate goal is, and that is the Big 12 title game, potentially a Big 12 championship, and ultimately a chance to play for a national title. That is all out there for BYU, but they cannot lose sight of the fact that this week, it's the most important week because it's the next week. That's seems too simplistic in many people's minds, and I'm sure you're probably going to comment in the comment section about it, but that's really what it comes down to. All right, coming up next, looking around the Big 12, and also some interesting thoughts from Brett Yormark yesterday at Big 12 basketball media days that we also need to talk about. So we'll talk about those two things, my Big 12 stock report, and a couple of notes from Brett Yormark that I thought was really, really prescient in the moment when it comes to kind of the national atmosphere around college athletics and how it affects the Big 12 and by extension BYU. And we'll get into that next as we roll on right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. College football is rolling, my friends, and I could not be more excited. I'm having the time of my life. Tailgates, rivalries, energy in the stands. But there is one thing that can kind of put a damper on all of it. It's trying to get tickets to the games you want to go to, because endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout, they can all have a downer effect on your enjoyment of this game that we love. That's why I want you guys to use what I use, and that's Game Time. It is the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay, and the best part about Game Time is you can go online right now, super simple, see exactly what the view from your seat will be, and you can see tickets and the prices that are as low as they possibly can be, and get lower the closer it gets to kickoff. They have zone deals. Pick the section, they pick the seats, and you save big from our friends at Game Time. It's faster, it's cheaper, and it's less stressful than any other way I have bought tickets, and I want you guys to give it a shot. So take the guesswork out of buying your college football tickets and do it with our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, redeem the promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's the promo code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not signed up for the Locked On Cougars Insider Group, what are you waiting for? Get the inside scoop on all things BYU football. And obviously, as we go into basketball season, a lot more on the hoop side. Best part is just $5 a month to be a part of the group. Supports what we're doing here at Locked On Cougars. And the kicker, you get a 14-day free trial before you're charged a single penny. So join us today. Link is in the show notes below, or reach out to us via social media and the like. We'll just square it away as a member of the Locked On Cougars Insider Group. All right, let's talk about the Big 12. Now, I usually do this on Mondays, but obviously with some of the news that was coming out and it being post-rivalry, we did not get to it. It's the Big 12 stock report. And what it is I take a look around the conference and talk about teams that are up, players that are up, and people that are trending down, or teams that are trending down. I got to give massive credit to Arizona State. I think that may have written them off in the aftermath of their blowout loss to Utah. Well, all they did is get Sam Leavitt back and go out there and beat Texas Tech 26-22. Arizona State is the defending Big 12 champs, and trying to declare them dead was probably premature. So congratulations to ASU, because they have once again proven that they are like a cockroach. You cannot kill them off yet. Kenny Dillingham's doing some incredible things down there in Tempe, and I'm really impressed with what he's doing. Also, stock up for Houston. I don't think Houston necessarily has the wins or the cachet to be a national player, but all they do is keep winning. They're 6-1. Connor Weigman, I think, was the player of the week, if I'm not mistaken, this week, and really impressive stuff as they fended off a hard-charging Arizona team that BYU knows how tough that team is to beat. So Houston, they remain in the race here. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw somebody said earlier this week that the situation is that 11 teams currently are within 2 games of playing for a Big 12 title. Now, it is still very early on to talk too much about that, but as you look at what's going on in the race for the Big 12, remember a season ago, we went into the final week with, I think it was 7 or 8 different teams, depending on scenarios, could have been in Arlington, Texas. It appears that race is going to be like that the entire rest of the way. And the hope is BYU stays above the fray in all of that. Other teams that are up in terms of stock. I am still so interested to see what TCU ultimately is. They're 5-2, but they do not seem like they are a complete team. They won the Revivalry. Yes, it is the Revivalry. I refuse to call it the Blue Bonnet, whatever nonsense they call it down there in Texas. It is the Revivalry as they beat Baylor 42-36. If TCU is as good as their record is, they could be a problem for BYU in their second to last home game, speaking of the Cougars, in November. If they're not, BYU could run roughshod in Provo. We're going to find out together. I'm very curious to see what Texas Tech is. And then I also got to give a shout out to Cincinnati. They're continuing to stay at pace with BYU. 6-1, 4-0 in the Big 12. Them and the Cougars are the top 2 teams. The Bearcats and the Cougars, top 2 teams of the Big 12 in the Big 12 right now as we kind of approach the halfway mark of this conference race. Kind of crazy to consider. Now, a couple of teams that are down, though. Oklahoma State. The biggest thing with Oklahoma State right now is they are essentially a scheduled W for anybody who plays them right now, and that would be Texas Tech, who I fully expect to bounce back against Oklahoma State. But the thing about Oklahoma State is they got to get a coach in place. And once they do, I think the build can commence. The sooner they make a hire, and I think that wouldn't come maybe necessarily till the end of the season, the better. Same thing with West Virginia. Rich Rod, it's a tear it down to the foundation and try and rebuild it. And the injuries that they've absorbed, speaking of West Virginia, it's not gonna get any better this season. It's nothing against the Mountaineers, but when UCF, who I also consider to be kind of bottom tier of the Big 12, is running over you 45-13, it's a tough scene for West Virginia. So that's kind of my stock report. Oh, I also do want to give a shout out to Brendan Sorsby. I think he was a guy that we talked a lot about different quarterbacks, this being the year of the quarterback in the Big 12. And all he has done, speaking of Brendan Sorsby at Cincinnati, is be right there among the best in the entire conference. So I just want to give a shout out to him. I've been really impressed with what he has put on the board because he has once again proven that this quarterback league is deeper than we can give it credit for, and that includes a guy like Bear Bachmeier. Lead BYU to a 7-0 record. Yeah, credit stock is up on Bear because the Bear is loose in Provo. It's one of the great calls. Jason Benetti absolutely nailed it. And by the way, Jason Benetti and RG3 are going to be back on the call this week as BYU takes on Iowa State. So get ready for more of those platitudes as they come. And then a couple of notes before we go on today's show about Big 12 basketball media days. The biggest thing coming out of Brett Yormark, his opening comments, and those were yesterday, was that he was asked a question about private equity in sports. We have heard that the Big Ten and Tony Petitti want nothing more than to cash into the tune of maybe $2+ billion in media rights. But the caveat is you're signing up with private equity that ultimately could obviously take money from you in the long run. And then also you're signing a grant of rights, I should say, into 2046. The situation with the Big Ten is worrisome to me, watching it as a guy who covers BYU in the Big 12. It seems like it's who ultimately benefits in that relationship. It seems like it's more the private equity side of things versus the conference, because even though the conference is getting the short-term cash infusion that a lot of athletic departments are pining for because they've over-leveraged themselves, if you're the Big 12, I appreciate what Brett Yormark said yesterday. Private equity isn't us. We are going to bet on the upside of our conference long term. He talked about leveraging, actually getting money from their international media rights. He said they're distributing football games via DAZN over in Europe. Well, we know that football in general, speaking of American football, is on the rise in Europe. Why can't you monetize that to some level? It may bring in pennies as compared to what the domestic media rights are, but giving it away for free, that doesn't make sense. I love the vision that Brett Yormark brings when it comes to this. He says private equity isn't us. We're going to bet on the upside of this league, and we're going to bet on the fact that long term, not taking that short term cash infusion, but selling off a stake of our equity to this private equity firm, that's not good business for us. I always thought BYU would be much like Michigan and USC with the Big Ten, who have been like kind of pumping the brakes, like saying, guys, this ain't it. This is not what we want to do. And I think sanity is prevailing to some level in the Big Ten with Michigan and USC pumping the brakes. I would have imagined had the Big 12 gone down this route, I think BYU, Shane Reese and the like probably would have pumped the brakes a little bit on saying, hey, we need to be careful about this. Because BYU, the one thing I know about Brigham Young University is they're not going to put themselves in a situation where they're going to be essentially backed into a corner and told what to do. BYU values the autonomy. They value the fact that they're a private religious institution, and they don't want to have somebody calling the shots for them. That's not good business. And I think Brett Yormark realizes that, and that's why, even though the Big 12 early on, when this private equity conversation came about, was the first one to be reported to be looking into it, it looks like for the time being that Brett Yormark and the powers that be in the Big 12 said, you know what? That's not us. We don't need that right now. Let's try and find other routes to do that. And him talking about selling international media rights, moving more games internationally to build that brand, I think it's genius. Like I said, is it going to bring in to the tune of billions like this private equity deal could have infused in the Big 12 and what the Big 10 could cash in on? No, it won't. But there are other ways to make money versus having to have somebody who may have a stake at the table essentially down the line telling you what to do while you're locked into a rights deal, much like the ACC, that could find you at a disadvantageous position that is just completely untenable at some point, because we've seen the ACC threaten to sue each other to get out of their media rights still. Things are calm there for the time being, but how much longer will it really hold in the ACC? I've got my questions. So I appreciate Brett Yormark. I think he's a visionary. I think he's got a really, really smart, business-savvy mind, and he's looking at all options to help the Big 12 without putting themselves, like I said, in a position that would ultimately harm the conference and by extension, harm BYU. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of the show. As always, appreciate all of your guys' support of the podcast. It means the world to me that you guys enjoy it as much as you do. Thank you for subscribing, rating, reviewing, liking the show. By the way, if you're on YouTube right now, little thumbs up button right over here as I point to it on YouTube. Hit that thumbs up button. That's all you got to do. That type of support really helps pay the bills around these parts. And thank you, truthfully, from the bottom of my heart for all the support. Subscribe, rate, review, share with your family and friends. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Until tomorrow, come back and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.